Hey LeGrand Alive! Welcome to Coffee with Will. I'm Will Bowman, and this episode is being brought to you by Grand Run Hospital, Northwest Furniture and Mattress, Anything to Digital, EONI, and Med Transport. Big shout out to our sponsors. They are awesome. We couldn't do it without them. Say thank you if you see them. And I am here today with a very special guest, Jim Whitbeck, who is a local business person as well as a new member of the LeGrand City Council. And what seat did you occupy?
Well, I'm taking position 6.
Position 6.
Yes, position
City
6.
Council, position 6,
Yeah.
recently elected to City Council. He is here today to chat with me a little bit about business and the outdoors and City Council, and maybe a little bit about how they all fit together, and what direction he wants to see LeGrand moving. So, Jim, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with me.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
So now, something you may not know, LeGrand Alive, is I knew Jim before he was cool. Like, I was a Jim fan before he was cool. I knew Jim when he was living at a friend of ours' house. I was out staining the deck, and I remember seeing some of the preliminary versions of the furniture that you have currently in your store.
Right.
Being built outside of the place that you were living. And I always kind of wondered, I was like, what's he building there? You know, like, what's he doing? And, little did I know you were building the structures for your slow but sure takeover of, Eastern Oregon here,
That's right. And the foundation.
Starting with the hangars and then moving slowly but surely into business and now City Council.
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about, something you mentioned, you were a philosophy student, then you moved to LeGrand, and then you kind of decided to jump headfirst into being involved in LeGrand, Oregon, and in Union County.
Yep.
Why did you decide to do this? What was kind of the impulse behind getting involved?
Well, I was thinking about how to respond to that. And I have a little story I can tell you.
All right. We like stories. We like stories.
So basically, I decided I kind of wanted to take my career before I came here was in corporate management consulting and HR, and then also sort of a strategic HR at a larger computer company, Lenovo. And so I was in LA and then Raleigh, and I kind of decided I wanted to take a break from all of that, and so I moved back to Portland, home to Portland. And I got into a supply chain, international supply chain management graduate program at PSU, and it was online, and so I kind of had the freedom to move wherever I wanted. And I had a friend out here, shout out to Greg Moulton, Next Step Carpet.
Greg Walton right there.
Yeah, I basically came out to just sort of help him as he sort of took over the family business. And I was basically just installing flooring, and just kind of getting my degree and working on these things. And so like supply chain, if you don't already know, it's sort of like if you're going to build a computer, like who's going to build the screen, who's going to get the chip, who's going to put it all together, who's going to ship it to the US, and who's going to sell it at Best Buy.
And you're coordinating all of that.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. So it's a little bit more of a technical angle than what HR was, obviously a little bit more soft skill. And so I was kind of having fun getting that degree. And when I got to LeGrand, it was very different from any place I had lived before. And, what I really enjoyed about it, sort of the culture of sort of like, I don't know how else to say it than like kind of just respect, like mutual respect between people, and then also kind of having a little bit of a closer tie to the land. I finally was able to kind of get back into the outdoors. My previous jobs, I was kind of living in cities and like, I was working a lot. Like, it was like 60, 80 hours.
Not as much time to go out and enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. So when I got here, I started kind of getting back into that, and I just was really enjoying the area. And then I remember I went to the film festival, which was in April of 14 that year, or April of 2014. And so, and then it kind of dawned on me like, oh wow, like there's an arts community here too, outdoors. You've got like kind of this cool like rural kind of small town feel and all that. And I got really excited about it. And that was one of the things that kind of led me to think about, how could I contribute to this community more long term?
Right.
So I started thinking about it. I thought, maybe I could open a business. Like there's, so what would I do? Well, I didn't, in part of the problem was that my career experience prior to coming here, nobody really needs a
Yeah.
corporate consultant in LeGrand, and so
or can afford a corporate consultant in LeGrand.
international supply chain management is super applicable here. So I kind of had to figure out something for myself, and so I was thinking about it, and I thought, there's a lot of outdoor stuff to do, but there's no place to get a good tent for like 100 miles. There's different places to get a good tent, but if you want to go to REI or get something medium higher end, like you're gonna have to drive 100 miles, right?
Right.
I thought, there's not a ton of competition. I could give it a shot and see what happens. And so I opened it up, and I didn't have any experience. I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't, as I said, I was just now getting back into the outdoors, so I was kind of like just figuring it out. When the film festival came back around again, I became a sponsor of it. I thought, a lot of the people that are going to the festival are probably customers of mine, and it would be meaningful to them if I, sponsored the event, said essentially like kind of the implication of me sponsoring the event, sort of like, you're my customer, I know what you care about, I care about it too, and I'm going to take the money that you give me, I'm going to put it into the things that we both care about, right? So when I did that, I remember that I was the first opening night of the festival. I hadn't, still pretty new to the area, didn't know people that, I was still kind of like just figuring things out, and I was a little late to the premiere showing of that festival. So I get to that opening night, and where it's in the Granada, and it's in the larger theater,
right.
And it's just a packed house, and I get in there just in time for them to start announcing the sponsors, and they say, and our newest sponsor, Blue Mountain Outfitters, and the whole room started chanting Blue Mountain Outfitters.
Wow.
And I almost started crying on the spot. Just like, oh my goodness, people really care.
People really like me.
Yeah. Well, and that was part of it. Was it what it also showed me is that in a community like this, you can have a lot of impact, and when you do something, you can see the ripple effect of it. It's not like if you're in Los Angeles, nobody's going to hear you make a sound.
Right.
Here, you can really have an impact on people's lives, even if you're just literally a $500 sponsor of a film festival.
Right.
And so you can have a real meaningful impact there. So that is kind of the long story of how I started to get more and more motivated to be involved in the community and how to kind of serve it through my business and using it sort of as a platform for what I consider a kind of service.
Right.
I think we're pretty well known now as being community focused, as being, a sponsor of lots of different kinds of events, and we have a scholarship up at the university, and we just try to do as much as we can, basically. That is sort of the objective of the business in a way.
Right. Not just to, make a living or whatever, but really to actively be putting money back into the community that you're living.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, you came, you started your business, you started donating to things. And fast forward to this year, you've kind of decided, now to take your. Well, actually, before we get started in that, one thing that I think I kind of wanted to ask you that relates to the outdoors. The outdoors, it's like you said. I mean, when you got here, you saw how integral the outdoors was to Eastern Oregon. I mean, we live, unlike maybe like in a more urban setting, we live with the wilderness just outside our front door. And coming from Alaska, I understand this concept. And so you started getting involved in it. You kind of started to make it your own and make your name, Jim Outdoor Store, those kinds of things. And I think the outdoors is something we can learn a lot from. And it's something that maybe a lot of us don't have a really connection with as much. I don't have as much of it as I would like to.
Yeah.
So I mean, speaking as someone who has kind of made the outdoors and the wilderness their livelihood and their business, is there things that we can learn from being so close to the outdoors and being like right on its doorstep, as it were?
I think for me, there's a few different components to it, because I'm in a for-profit industry that feeds off of the outdoors. But then I also have my own sort of personal experience of the outdoors, which is sort of like I like to push myself physically and mentally. So I've had the opportunity to summit Rainier and Adams and Hood and St. Helens all in the last few years on skis. And that's something that I'm proud of, not because I hit the summit, but because, you know, you wake up at like 1 a.m., you start climbing, you're on your skis for like 12 hours straight, you know, like getting all the way to the top. And only I know what it was like to go through that, you know, and it was intense. And it was like, you know, it's a constant process of like looking up, there's the summit, no way I'm getting there. There's just no way.
Right.
But I'm going to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And then,
Right.
you know, whatever it is, however many hours later, sun comes up and you're at the top and you're looking down, you can see your car way, 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 way down there, you know?
Wow.
And it's like, I don't know how I did that. Like, that's incredible, you know? So that feeling, not so much the extreme sort of sport component of it,
Right.
which is, you know, of interest and fun and exciting, but more just that sort of personal, like, almost like a microcosm of what it's like to try to accomplish any goal, you know?
Right.
You know, it's just sort of like pushing against your own mental and physical limitations to accomplish something that is significant. And so that's sort of my personal experience of it. So there's a mental component of that, there's a physical, and arguably I think there's a spiritual as well. And so those are all, those are really important to me. You know, as I mentioned, like I'm also in the for-profit side of it, and there's some interesting things that are sort of at play in the outdoor industry in terms of like what you might call a kind of consumerism aspect of like, latest, greatest tent. It's, you know, you bought the tent for, you know, 2 years ago for X amount of dollars that you thought would be the lifetime tent or whatever, and then 2 years later they revamp it, and you know you gotta go buy.
Now you have to have that new one.
Yeah, exactly. You read the magazines and all that kind of stuff, and we try to not buy into that sort of as a business, because there's a lot of problematic aspects to that, not least of which is that that's hard on the environment. It's hard on the outdoors for everybody to buy a new tent every 2 years. But then, you know, for us, the other component to that is that it reduces the accessibility of it. So if you're somebody who's just getting out, like trying to do, you know, just trying to go hiking or go on a short backpacking trip or something like that, you got to buy the tent, the pack, the sleeping bag, the clothes. You got to get the stove and the filter. If you're not careful, you're $1,000 in without even, you know, batting an eye. And so a college student maybe that doesn't come from a family that was able to get out a lot, like it's really hard for them to pull all that together and make it happen. And so we try to sort of lower that bar and not necessarily encourage people to like come in and get the latest, greatest. We don't even really carry the latest, greatest, to be honest. We have some really cool new things and stuff like that in there, but we don't really bother with, you know, the $400 tents, for instance.
Right.
I keep one in stock, and that's, you know,
for that one guy who's like, "Yep, I just want to buy a $400."
Exactly. Exactly. I don't buy it $400. You know, so it really is, and we try to drive sort of the mentality of like investment. So it's like, you know, if you really care about your sleep at night, get a good sleeping bag, get a good pad, and then take the money that you spend there and kind of skimp a little bit maybe on your shelter, like on the tent itself or something like that, so that you're not trying to buy the best of all categories, because you're just, what you usually end up doing there is you don't really know what you care about until you've been out a couple of times. So it's like, don't necessarily buy the best sleeping bag because you may not care about your sleeping bag. You know, so for me personally, for a long time, I just carried a very simple bivy sack, a decent sleeping bag, and a pretty light pack, because I just want to go really fast. I just want to get in and get out because I got a lot of work to do at home, you know? And so, you know, so it's really just a question of evolving priorities. And so essentially that's another way of trying to make things a little bit more accessible, a little bit easier for anybody to be able to get out and try something new and have that experience of like, I don't know if I can go 7 miles into Mirror Lake, but, you know, let's give it a shot and you know, have that kind of like, wow, I did it, you know, I did it. So that's, I guess, kind of our process is, you know, I have my experience of it. I want people to be able to have that. and make it as easy as possible for them
Right.
to be able to get in and do that. So.
Well, and I think that, you guys focus a lot on education. You guys
Yeah.
do classes. I mean, for a while there, we were doing a show called Eastern Oregon Adventures,
Yeah.
where we would talk about, outdoorsy things, and education. And so, because it sounds to me like, your goal is not necessarily just to sell gear.
Mm-hmm.
It's really to help people to experience the outdoors
Yep.
and have it be more accessible to
Yeah,
them.
yeah, absolutely,
Right.
yeah. I think it's obviously, from what I said at the beginning, like it's important to me to use the business as a platform for community engagement.
Right.
And so I don't think I would do it any other way, even if I had a stationery store or something like that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think I would still probably be doing some kind of
Jim the
education.
stationary salesman.
Yeah,
there we
exactly.
go.
So, I don't know if I would do it like that differently, even if I was, in a different position. But I will say, like, the business has been, it's been really, rewarding for me to be able to have that position where it's like, I really like this place. Like, what can I do to, help out? And
Right.
this has been a great way for me to be able to get that done. And then over time, I kind of became more and more involved in volunteer stuff and whatnot. And we can talk about that, kind of how that led to the council idea. But yeah, so I think, using the business that way as a platform, and then, just making things accessible to people is really important. So
Right. So we've kind of talked about your experience at the outdoors, talked a little bit about your business, but now we're kind of, the sort of hot topic, as it were, pardon my reference to my teenage years, is, being on the city council.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've moved, you say, from the business into the volunteer, and now you're taking your volunteerism sort of to the next step.
Yeah.
And so what made you kind of jump from, what you were doing to actually being an active member of a decision-making body on the municipal government?
Yeah. I think one of the things I would say is it was definitely a build. So
Right.
when I started, I got onto the board for the Grand Main Street, and I got into the board for the film festival. I'm on the board for the Small Business Development Center. I was on the tourism promotion committee.
Right.
So
you've done a lot.
Yeah. So sort of like, kind of got involved in lots of different things here and there, and got more and more interested in what was happening with the city, kind of just as a way of sort of like elevating a lot of that, seeing how that was sort of, affecting the things that were happening with the other efforts that I was in, kind of downstream, if you will.
Right.
And so we got, basically, it wasn't necessarily like I had a master plan, to be honest. I wish I could say like
That's what you say now.
Yeah, but. Well, yeah. I wish I could say like it was all a part of the thing or something. But,
all a part of the plan.
Yeah, right, exactly. But it really wasn't. I just it hadn't occurred to me that that would be a possibility. But as I thought about it, it really sort of represented because. Well, I let go a lot of those commitments and then sort of consolidated it into the council.
Yeah, you kind of just took a lot of that energy you were kind of dispersing into different areas and decided I'm going to put it into this one area.
Yeah, and a number of things that I was involved in, tourism promotion committee. Also, I've been facilitating a meeting of the mayors in the county, and both of those are things. And I joined the planning commission a year ago too, and so. All of those three things have to come off in order for me to join city council. It's sort of a part of the process. I can't be involved in those things while I'm on city council at the same time, basically. So in a way, it was nice from a commitment standpoint because it's sort of like most of my commitments shuffle off when I bring on council, so that the council isn't stacking on top of everything else. Right. Yeah, I think it's just I really. Like I said, I have a passion for the community. I think it's a really important place, and there's a lot of. I just think there's a lot of possibilities in front of us, and so getting involved with council became something that was really appealing to me. Seeing how those decisions get made, what kind of influence a council member has, and what the limitations are of that too.
Right.
the structure of LeGrand government is a little bit different from other governments in the county, for instance. We can talk more about that, but basically I think joining council was just a way to sort of elevate a lot of what I was doing and also kind of consolidate it so that I didn't have maybe quite as many meetings.
Right.
But
so, it's just one meeting that's kind of a really important
a big one.
Right?
A lot of people show up. Yeah, right.
Okay, so and that's, I'm glad that you said that, because you mentioned, because that kind of leads me into my next question. You mentioned possibilities, and I think that, something I've consistently heard talking to a lot of people that are, kind of our age, who are coming into the community, who are starting to actively be a participant in the community, whether through political or just, economic, whatever pursuits, is that, they really do look at Union County and they do see possibilities. They see a future. They don't see something that's been, they see something that will be. So what are some of those possibilities in your brain? And I know this is, maybe you don't have this part of your master plan, maybe this is kind of a time for you to kind of be like, oh, well, maybe this is a possibility.
Yeah.
What are some of those possibilities that you see? And as council, as being on the council, what sort of direction do you hope to see our city go in?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot in that. And for me, that you mentioned Bend, that's one of the questions that comes up is do we want to be like Bend? And most people might say, maybe not. I think we want to be the best version of ourselves that we can.
Right.
And so, to me, one of my passions, as you can imagine, coming from where I am as a business owner, would be economic development. And so having a balance between larger employers and then also sort of a vibrant downtown small business community, I see that as kind of fundamental to the county LeGrand's future. And that's a tricky balance, to me it's sort of maybe Tri-Cities would be a model of, bring in larger businesses. You got Costco, you got Home Depot, or whatever, those kinds of businesses. And LeGrand's a little bit more remote, and so those kinds of things may not be available to us. And I would rather see us have sort of small business alternatives as well as the larger employers. So it's not sustainable to necessarily just say, we need as many Blue Mountain Outfitters as possible.
Right.
And part of the reason for that I feel like I can say as a small business owner myself, I employ 2 people besides myself. And I don't think I'll employ a lot more than that. I don't think I can. I don't think my business can support a lot more than that. So I don't necessarily want the city to dump as much money as possible into small businesses when, you have situations like what, the Boise Cascade plants. They're not necessarily closing, but there is a need to make sure that you have healthy employment in the area. And, having as many Blue Mountain Outfitters as possible is not necessarily the way to accomplish that. So you do have to have kind of the balance between maybe larger corporations and small businesses. And so that's kind of part of the agenda as I see it. And there's a lot of activities sort of happening around that with the council and with the Urban Renewal Agency that I think is really important. So.
Very cool. So economic development, kind of striking a balance between bigger business and smaller business, because historically LeGrand has not been super friendly to bigger corporations coming in and kind of doing their thing, whereas maybe that might change in the future.
Well, I might challenge that.
Sure, go for it. Challenge me.
I honestly can't I've only lived here 5 years or whatever, and I can't necessarily speak entirely to how LeGrand has welcomed or not welcomed larger businesses.
Right.
But one of the challenges when I was looking at starting the shop, I emailed the business development people at REI, and I said, why don't you have anything out here? Can I help you start something out here? I have all this corporate background. Somebody should do something out here. Where are you? And they said, we don't have any interest in being on that side of the state or something like that.
Wow.
Right? That sounds maybe stronger than what they
it's
said.
Just it was a polite way of saying they don't have a profit to be able to be over here.
Right. Yeah. We just don't have the population base.
Right.
Now, there's some different components to that, and so that's not necessarily LeGrand's fault, right? That's not the study of LeGrand being not business friendly or something. What it it requires a different kind of mindset. So, for instance, it doesn't necessarily compute for REI, who operates in larger metropolitan areas, to understand that like the regulars for Blue Mountain Outfitters come from Bend, they come from Enterprise and Joseph, they come from Pendleton, right? People out here are used to the fact that like, you know, you got to make a day trip to Walmart today. You know, everybody pile in the car and let's go, you know? And so that concept of driving 1 hour to look at the tents that Blue Mountain Outfitters has is not super crazy. So in a way, like our metropolitan area really is the 3 counties. And so taken together plus, you know, some of Pendleton at least. So that's a concept that's a little bit different that REI may not draw on, where like they're looking for people within a 20-minute drive time or whatever.
Right.
You know, but still, you know, you take the 3 counties, you got 45,000 people maybe or whatever, and so that's still not quite enough to support a larger business like that. So if Cabela's was looking, like this would be a difficult place for them. You know, if Home Depot was looking, this would be a difficult place for them. And if you bring those in, they're going to displace, you know, if Cabela's comes in, Blue Mountain Outfitters is gone.
It's gone.
It just is. And, you know, maybe that's okay. You know, maybe that's what LeGrand wants and needs, and that's okay. But I guess part of my objective on council is to make sure that we're deliberate about gathering information as to what LeGrand wants and needs and going and executing on that, making that process as transparent as possible. Because there are efforts right now underway to go reach out to those larger companies, as well as ways to support smaller business owners as well. So making sure that we're as strategic as possible, sort of effective as possible on executing sort of a vision for LeGrand that is maybe more holistic and inclusive as possible is important. And I know a lot of that's kind of fuzzy, but there's plenty of specifics that we can get into too.
Well, you haven't quite figured out your master plan yet.
Yes.
You're in the process of figuring out your master plan, and so it's going to be a little fuzzy here and there.
And for what it's worth, I think, you know, my philosophy being on council is a little bit less about my master plan. Than it is like trying to find out what people want a master plan
what everybody
to be
else's master plan is, and then kind of synthesizing that into a master plan.
In a way, like I'm not really that interested in my own point of view in many respects, where like I think it's much more important to, you know, I'm on there to serve, not to drive my own personal agenda. I have opinions, but you know, it's I think, and I mentioned this in the forum, that to me, like the 2 main values in this capacity for me are kind of just making sure to have as much dialogue as possible, and then also to drive as much accountability as possible. You know, being transparent is kind of something that gets lumped in there as well. So
very cool, very cool. All right, well, I think we're kind of coming to the close of our interview here, but before we jump off, I want to jump back from the city council to the outdoors thing. And you know, you mentioned one of your biggest things is making the outdoors accessible to people. If you had a couple tips, you know, and you can think about this because I know I didn't prep you for this question. If you had a couple tips for people someone who maybe is trying to get more involved in the outdoors, or maybe he's just starting, you know, like maybe look right at the camera there and just kind of say, you know, LeGrand Alive, these are some tips that might be good.
Sure.
And like I said, think about that, you know, you don't have to answer right away.
Well, I think the main thing would just be to find something that interests you and engage with it on your own terms. Don't try to do everything at once. Don't try to buy the best stuff. Just go enjoy something, and then try to gather from that what you continue to enjoy more, which mostly it's like, you know, go on a day hike. See what you enjoy about the day hike. Do you like being in the sun? Do you like being in weird weather? Do you like the snow? Do you like, you know, what kind of things that you actually enjoy? And just pursue that. That's really all that matters. And, you know, maybe stay out of the magazines for a while, you know, like don't get attached to what the industry is saying.
Keep your credit card in a safe place away from the magazines for a while.
I mean, that's the thing, is like the worst possible thing sometimes for people is to feel like they have to get the best stuff right out of the gate, or even like buy the best stuff and then realize that, you know, they bought a whole bunch of backpacking equipment when really all they want to do is go skiing at Anthony Lakes all day, you know? And so, mostly just trust yourself and get out and enjoy stuff. And then from that, you'll kind of evolve what your priorities are, what matters, what you know, what kinds of equipment might be worth prioritizing and investing in. And yeah, just kind of listen to yourself, I think, is what it comes down to.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Really appreciate your time, and thank you, LeGrand Alive, for tuning in and sticking with us. This has been Coffee with Will and Jim Whitbeck, brought to you by Grand Ronde Hospital, Northwest Furniture and Mattress, Anything 2 Digital, EO&I, and Med Transport. These sponsors are fantastic. They do so much. They bring you all this programming. So if you see someone that owns or works at one of those places, make sure to give a big shout out. Thank you for sponsoring this show. So we'll see you next time, LeGrand Alive, on Coffee with Will. Be sure to like and share the video and tune in for more local content.